Major funding for Saving Our Waters is provided by Vermont EPSCoR, funded by the National Science Foundation, supporting science, technology, engineering, and math in Vermont colleges and businesses, and encouraging young Vermonters to seek careers in science. Additional funding provided by and from viewers like you. Thank you.
What are we discharging into our waters that are going to be the PCBs of tomorrow? And there are certainly a lot of them.
Pharmaceuticals are considered contaminants of emerging concern because we don't really know what it means for humans to be exposed to these very small doses.
Community involvement is absolutely critical to an effective cleanup process.
All of these small changes do add up if enough of us do them.
We're using science to inform decisions, policy decisions, strategic investments about how to project a future that we all agree to. No one's going to say we want dirty water. The question is, what's effective?
Decades ago, our country and region took on the challenge and expense of cleaning up our waters from sewage and industrial waste that we carelessly dumped into our rivers and lakes. Today, we are dealing with multiple sources of nutrients and pollution that affect our water. These new threats, made more severe by climate change, create an urgency to act now in multiple ways to save our waters and support resiliency in our streams, rivers, and lakes. Science is discovering pathways for the best approaches for all of us to do our part. In the recent past, when uninformed behaviors challenged our waters and solutions were costly, we have taken action to ensure clean water for us today.
Our work on it started back in the 1980s when PCBs were one of the factors that led to health advisories for fish in Lake Champlain. And so we started advocating for a comprehensive study of toxic contamination in the lake. PCBs are polychlorinated biphenyls. They were manufactured by one company, Monsanto, from around 1929 to 1977. They have been shown to trigger learning disabilities, have neurological effects, and have carcinogenic effect too.
Cumberland Bay is now enjoyed daily by residents, many of whom don't realize the work and cost that went into making the water safe again.
Ultimately, that cleanup cost over $30 million. I think there are a lot of lessons to learn from Cumberland Bay, and I think one of them is to be really cautious about what we let out into the waste stream. We didn't really look hard enough as a society to see all the implications, and they are significant. What are we discharging into our waters that are going to be the PCBs of tomorrow? And there are certainly a lot of them.
For most of Vermont, Lake Champlain is the sort of biggest body of water and sort of the biggest concern. Southern Vermont has a number of sort of industrial legacy issues that are slightly different than that. Today, we have not single threats or challenges to our water quality, but a number of sort of cascading and converging challenges. We have agricultural runoff issues. We have a legacy of industrial contamination. We have aging water infrastructure for municipality and drinking water, and we have the emerging threat of extreme weather events brought by climate change.
It all really began over in Hoosick Falls, New York, when their water system ultimately was found to be contaminated with PFOA, and that was the whole community. That was the municipal water system. And that's when they discovered that there were some very serious contaminations in the wells that were directly east of the old ChemFam plant. We had something like 278 homes that were contaminated.
PFOA is a synthetic chemical that's man-made and it's toxic. It's key to the manufacture of a number of high-performance plastics. Over the years, over the decades, a new picture emerged of a toxicity that unfolds with infuriating subtlety over the course of decades and on the scale of parts per trillion.
It was a big surprise. It's certainly nothing that we ever anticipated when we built a house here. The contamination is here. You know, it was exported from the factory. It's in the soil, and it's going to be in the soil for probably hundreds of years. So this property is contaminated. I mean, and it's going to be contaminated, and there's nothing we can do about it. The levels in our blood are, you know, well above the national or world average of PFOA. Are there any immediate health effects? I mean, we have health issues, but perhaps not. But long term, you know, I mean, that's always in the back of your head.
Our wastewater treatment plants have significantly reduced pollutants reaching the lake that supplies 145,000 Vermonters with water. But scientists have discovered that plastics and pharmaceuticals, from over-the-counter cold medicine to antidepressants, are entering our drinking water supplies.
So microplastics are a big concern. We've been aware of them in marine systems for quite a long time, but it hasn't been until more recently that we've seen them in freshwater systems. Plastics absorb a lot of other materials that are floating in the water, whether it be pathogenic bacteria or gasoline and other heavy metals and toxins. Research is finding that plastics are in earthworms, in honey, sea salt, beer, the oysters and mussels that people eat, and even in the tissues of fish. I think this research is probably the most important research I've done. Part of the reason is that I think that we are the primary contributors to this sort of pollution. These particles almost have an unlimited lifespan because they just get smaller and smaller and smaller and then impact different kinds of organisms. Microplastics are entering the waterways in many different channels. One is through wastewater treatment plants. But we also have to think about what they're processing. So they're processing water that's coming from our homes. Everything that we do has an impact, and it may not just impact us, but it may impact other organisms. We're noting a lot of fibers within the digestive tracts of these organisms. A lot of the fibers that we're seeing are synthetic, and they're derived from washing synthetic clothing such as fleece.
The majority of the chemicals that we're seeing in the wastewater we think are coming from excretion. So when you consume the drug, you're going to excrete the component of it that you aren't using. The pharmaceuticals are cycling through the water as it comes through wastewater into your lakes and streams, and then we're drawing from that water back out for drinking water, filtering it, doing everything that we're supposed to be doing, and yet those pharmaceuticals are making it through. Pharmaceuticals are considered contaminants of emerging concern and chemicals of emerging concern by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the World Health Organization, because we don't really know what it means for humans to be exposed to these very small doses kind of cumulatively over your lifetime, and also because of the effects that we are seeing on various species in the lake, for example. Anything from zooplankton, the really tiny little bottom of the food chain guys that change their behaviors when they're in the presence of certain pharmaceuticals, and all the way up through some of your larger fish where some of these chemicals are bioaccumulating, and we're finding that antidepressants are accumulating in fish brains, and we don't know exactly what that means.
Understanding emerging contaminants, as well as current opportunities to reduce human impacts to our waters, will take an all-in approach. Vermont EPSCoR scientists are studying not only how pollution is entering our waters under normal conditions, but, more recently, how our watersheds operate and move sediment under extreme weather events.
When we have a big rainstorm, that's when a lot of the pollution comes down from the watershed into the lake. you can get maybe 60% of the phosphorus from the entire year coming from 1 or 2 big extreme events. So that's one of the reasons we want to focus on, are there riparian areas that are effective? If so, can we do something to help other riparian areas also be effective during extreme events? And then are there areas that are really not working well, and then what can we do to improve that?
Riparian zones are really the interface between what's happening in the soil and what's happening in the stream. What we're doing in each of these 4 field sites is that we install a set of sensors in the ground. There's also going to be sensors in the stream. And really what we're interested in is to understand and learn more about how water moves through the system, how nutrients move through the system.
Andrew Schroth and Carol Adair are implementing sensors in soil and in different water bodies. And they're collecting data. They're collecting a lot of data over time. And so this is a big data opportunity for us. And so these are also remote sensors. And so what we're doing with Andrew and Carol's sensor network is aligning the results when an extreme event pulses through the system. We're using that data stream to calibrate the integrated assessment model to make sure that there's a level of accuracy to the results that we're generating. So it's very critical.
The previous research really deals more with land use change and kind of consistent climate change over time. So we're really focused much more on when we have these unexpected big events, what are the properties of a riparian area that make it work during those events. There are periods of time that haven't been very well examined so far, like spring melt or wintertime even, and the sensors will be working that whole time. So we have an opportunity to really look at these periods of time that most people don't get a chance to look at, and I think that's really exciting.
Traditionally, I would say scientists stayed in their little corner, and now we're really working together and really advancing understanding of surface processes tremendously. So we will never be able to understand anything if we would just stick with one discipline.
There's a lot of interaction between us and stakeholders, which is a great part of this work. And then there's the other end, which is that all of these different teams that are involved in this work, there's a social science side, and there's our side where we go out in the woods and put sensors everywhere. But we all communicate to each other.
I'm not only working with other people that study just the hydrology or the movement of water and the chemistry of water, we're working with now soil scientists, as well as climatologists, lake scientists, and even social scientists to try and understand what decisions we make across the landscape that impact water quality. And we're trying to all work together to develop holistic models that can be used to understand how these various components interact with one another and either promote or suppress water quality.
People are very interested in what we're finding, and it actually gets put to use by stakeholders, whether that's the government or just people who are interested in promoting water quality within Lake Champlain Basin. And people take us very seriously, and they want to know what we find out.
We find that northeastern U.S., including Vermont, is becoming more wet and persistently wet, and our frequencies and intensities of some of those storm events are also going up. So what are their impacts on the water quality and in the systems? That's the goal of this project that we are trying to quantify and understand, and what can be done to make the landscapes, people, and the lake more resilient against these extreme events.
And so in order to capture that in a model, we really need to think in an integrated way. And so we're doing this in the integrated assessment model platform that we've designed for the BRE project. So in essence, we're trying to capture not every dimension of this complex system, but as much of it that can help us describe and to project into the future what possible alternative states of the system will be. When the water flows off the land in different land use types, we get a signal for phosphorus, nutrients, and that phosphorus coming off the land is interacting with the water column in these shallow bays, and we're able then to simulate the blooms. We like to think of this as a crystal ball. It's an imperfect one. There's a lot of uncertainty that percolates through it. We are by no means saying that this is exactly what's going to happen, but what it allows for all of us to think about the future. We're all interested in, well, what's it going to cost? And what are the consequences if we don't do anything?
So we're trying to kind of understand what can be done at the national, at the state level, at the local level to kind of account for this direct or indirect effects of climate change and kind of better manage, make sure that your lake stays clean and water quality is maintained for the future generations.
Scientists are working together and studying not only water systems, but human behavior as well.
I think our broader goal here is to help inform how we might preserve Lake Champlain and water quality in Vermont as we move forward with a changing climate, as potential for our population to grow. We need to better understand how all these complex systems combine and commingle so that we are able, at least my hope is that we can better plan and better design our social and our ecological systems so that we can preserve Lake Champlain for future generations.
So we're trying to actually figure out what influences people and how do they make those decisions. And if we have really cool science, how do we actually let them know about that? Will they actually use it?
So the SEGS Lab grew out of the research grant from the National Science Foundation that Vermont EPSCoR has facilitated. And one of the objectives of the EPSCoR program nationally is to develop research infrastructure in small states. And the SEGS Lab is one of those byproducts. And what the lab allows us to do is to collect a novel data stream using gaming and simulation to better understand how humans make decisions in various different kinds of contexts and scenarios.
Our research more closely gets to how humans really behave, and having the real potential to make recommendations and influence policies towards decisions that people will actually use and behaviors that they'll actually adopt. And we can tell those behaviors and those decisions based on the decisions and the behaviors that we see in their gameplay.
Vermont scientists working in the EPSCoR Basin Resilience to Extreme Events project continue to research the entire landscape, the social and ecological system, sensitive to change brought about by our decisions now, in the past, and in the future.
Legislature also was part of this process, and in 2015 enacted what we call Act 64, but sometimes referred to as Vermont's Clean Water Act. This includes a number of statutory and regulatory changes, permitting programs, changes in guidance and tools that are available, as well as a lot of work relative to basin planning, going out and actually identifying needs on the ground, prioritizing those needs, and then moving them quickly through a planning, design, engineering, and ultimately to implementation. I say we're moving them quickly, but there are literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of projects that will need to be constructed in order to achieve our clean water goals. And so this planning, assessment, engineering phase takes time because we can't do it all at once. And it will be likely the better part of 20 years before we're able to see the majority of these projects constructed on the ground.
As more and more of our social and ecological systems are being understood, it is also important to know that action and work on the ground has been happening. Who's involved in keeping our waters clean? Everyone. Scientists are helping us understand the issues. Our legislators are creating policies that increase resilience. Our cities and towns are dealing with wastewater and stormwater. Residents are minimizing their stormwater impacts. Landowners are preserving wetlands and buffers. Farmers are using best management practices. What will you do to keep our waters clean? Advocacy groups play a significant role by actively engaging students and volunteers in monitoring, education, preservation, and resiliency building efforts.
Four years ago, my wife and I were out kayaking right here in St. Albans Bay, and the whole bay was blooming. And I wanted to figure out what it was all about, so that's why I decided to do volunteer monitoring.
We have over 100 volunteers just for Lake Champlain. Those citizen monitors go out and they do visual assessments and then take water samples, at least weekly. Those samples were then assessed at various labs. They put it to a data tracker, which is very publicly available information.
Knowing that we're doing something that's helpful, they need lots of monitors.
We live on the lake, we enjoy the lake, and I would like to participate because I want to know what's going on in the lake, and that's the best way to find out.
A lot of energy out here, a lot of folks wanting to come out and protect the water quality of Lake Champlain.
We're basically trying to reestablish this floodplain forest that existed hundreds of years ago by reestablishing these native species that were once here. We are partnering up with the Lake Champlain Land Trust and the Intervale Center and Healthy Living and surrounding communities to bring awareness to water quality, but also the importance of riparian restoration work and floodplain restoration work.
It's really exciting because everyone wants to get involved, and we're just giving them opportunities to get involved.
The vast majority of the land within the state is privately owned, and the landowners are the reason that many of these programs are able to be successful.
Yeah, we're very happy that we restored the land and we're part of this project. The NRCS has been great to work with, very flexible. I know that this property is going to be and only get better going forward. They've planted over 1,000 trees here, many of which are nut bearing, which again will benefit the deer and the ducks going forward.
Well, I find the wetlands to be one of the most special parts of the property, so I think this is a really important step to restore the depth of the ecosystem, and particularly here.
So it's a lot of fun working with people who have those same values and that same vision for their land. And it's oftentimes farmers that we work with who have cropland for 30 or 40 years. They've come to a point where they understand the land and they want to bring it back to wetlands and to see the wildlife habitat be restored and to see ducks come back out in the land and to see more deer out there. But we want to focus on some of these areas that really aren't very good. They're very marginal from an agricultural standpoint, but would have really significant wildlife habitat and water quality benefits by restoring that land. And we want to target those areas and work with those private landowners who want to voluntarily work with us to help achieve that shared vision of that habitat restoration.
Watershed for Every Classroom is designed over an 11-day period. We really want the teachers to experience firsthand what the environment of the watershed was like in New York, Vermont, and Quebec.
Thinking about change over time. So when we get teachers out into the natural world and seeing them getting jazzed up and excited and inquisitive about what's going on here, then that cascades right on down to their students.
We're looking for BMIs.
Benthic macroinvertebrates. Indicators of water quality.
Trying to foster this engagement with your environment that you can take with you through your whole life, and to foster a sense of understanding as well as stewardship.
The challenges that we're facing with global warming and with climate change, I think we have to educate our students.
Are you sure he doesn't have any tails?
Many are encouraged by the all-in approach, ranging from educating our children, changing land use practices, and protecting wetlands and buffers. At this critical turning point for saving our waters, scientists can lead the way to best practices, and then we must work with our legislators and neighbors to turn the tide. Supporting solutions that not only clean our waters, but increase recreational opportunities, support fish and wildlife habitat, and improve lake and flood resiliency. Saving our waters will require everyone's efforts.
Many of the other issues that we have here in Lake Champlain are things that can be fixed if there is enough public interest and if people understand how these things can be fixed.
The unfortunate reality is it's going to require people to change behavior, and that isn't just about you and me picking up dog poop. It's about industries and real estate developers and municipalities spending money on infrastructure and doing things differently.
So we all have to be all in terms of really protecting this lake, improving it, and managing what we do on the land in order to ensure that water quality we all want to see.
Hope powers us.
It is not something that is a reaction to what's going on out there. Hope arises from within and connects you to all that is.
Vermont, it's a really wonderful place to do this type of research. You also get the impression that it means something, not only to you as a researcher, but to the general public. Everybody's kind of in the same boat and really wants to see this place healthy and sustainable.
There's a civility in our region that I think a lot of places across the world are actually looking to. And so if we can't solve this problem through our collective will, through our collaborations and partnerships, very few places in the world will.
Major funding for Saving Our Waters is provided by Vermont EPSCoR, funded by the National Science Foundation, supporting science, technology, engineering, and math in Vermont colleges and businesses, and encouraging young Vermonters to seek careers in science. Additional funding provided by and from viewers like you. Thank you.